This video is intended for those of you who are thinking of studying A-level philosophy this year. There's only one exam board that does A-level philosophy in the UK, so everything I say to you about this will be true of an A-level philosophy course you study. What is philosophy? Philosophy comes from an ancient Greek word which means philos, which is love, friendship, affection, and sophia, which means wisdom. So philosophy designated a group of people who sought wisdom, who looked for wisdom. The A-level in philosophy is split into four categories, which basically follows this. It's split into epistemology, ethical theory, philosophy of God, and philosophy of mind. So let me tell you a little bit about each of those. So in epistemology, we ask questions about knowledge. The kind of questions we ask are, where does knowledge come from? What do we mean by knowledge? Can we know anything? And can we trust our sense experience? So let's look at that last one. Can we trust our sense experience? Well, think about this. When you're looking at a pencil in a glass of water, the light, instead of reflecting, refracts through water, which means that what you see appears crooked. So the thing up here in your head is crooked, the thing out there in the external world is straight. Does that mean that you're seeing the pencil? Or does that mean you're seeing something up here in your head that represents the pencil out there in the world? In other words, do we see things in our mind, or do we see things in the world? This is an important question because it asks us how much we can trust our sense experiences. Should we rely on them to tell us how the world is? The second unit, ethical philosophy, asks questions about how we should live our life. Or perhaps there is no just one way we should live our lives. So for example, in some countries it's considered bad to eat beef. And in other countries it's considered perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with eating beef. Is that to do with something true in the world that we could discover? That perhaps science in the future will tell us you should or you shouldn't do this kind of thing? Or is that the kind of thing that's not true? That's basically socially constructed? That each society has come to in its own way and then implements? And if that is true, does that mean that there isn't one way to survive and that we should live our lives? The question it effectively asks is morality objective? Is it the kind of thing we can talk about in an objective way? Or is it ultimately relative to societies and subjective, not the kind of thing that we can ever agree on? And if that is true, what kind of implications does that have? The third and important section is philosophy of religion. Philosophy of religion looks at arguments for and against the existence of God. And of course, this goes back many thousands of years and has really important implications for all of society. One of the most important questions in that is what we might call the cosmological argument. It asks the question, where does the world come from? Or, in another way of putting it, why is there something and not nothing? Logically speaking, it would make more sense if there was nothing in the world. Much simpler than having all these complex things like life forms and galaxies and laws of physics and works of art and symphonies. I mean, why have all this stuff when there could have been nothing at all? And then the question becomes, well, either all this stuff came from something, we have to ask about what that something is, or it came from nothing. It doesn't make sense to think it came from nothing because we think that something can't come from nothing, but maybe it can. We don't know. Either way, it seems to indicate that there's some source, some cause, something that has brought the world into existence. And if that's so, is that God? The final part of the course, called Philosophy of Mind, asks questions ultimately about the mind, what's going on in your mind and in your head. So one question we might ask is the mind the same as the soul? And that would be something that we call substance dualism. Or is the mind just physical and chemical processes that are going on in the world? And that's called physicalism. Another question we can ask is, what makes mind different from things that are not mind? So what makes it the case that, let's say, I have a mind and a rock or a stone or a planet doesn't have a mind? What's the difference between those two things? Another question that's becoming very important is a question about whether we can understand the mind as a very sophisticated kind of computer, functioning system. If AI becomes intelligent enough and is able to start giving itself its own commands, will AI then have a mind? Will it have experiences like we are now up here? It seems that there's a difference between a computer system that functions really well and a computer system that functions really well with a mind. So what does the mind bit mean in that? That's the kind of question you'd be asking in the philosophy of mind. And if you think any of these questions are interesting, especially most of them, then I would suggest you consider studying the A-level in philosophy.